Even to aspire for the bodhicitta brings great benefits, but nothing like those that come once we begin to act on our aspiration. From the moment we definitely decide to live and practice for the benefit of all, a continuous stream of merit rains down on us, even when we are asleep or distracted. This state of mind in which we care more for others than they care for themselves is a miraculous jewel, and its arising is a wonder. It is the source of the world's joy and the cure for the world's suffering. There is no way we can fathom the depths of its goodness. I bow down to those in whom this precious jewel of the mind has arisen. I go for refuge to those sources of joy who bring happiness even to those who harm them. So this is a really beautiful evocation of the bodhicitta, the enlightened mind, the mind of wisdom and compassion, the mind of a bodhisattva. And a bodhisattva is somebody who's dedicated to enlightenment with and for all beings. They're dedicated to ending all suffering for all beings. And they're convinced that enlightenment is what will do that. Enlightenment is what will bring about the end of suffering for all beings. And they'll do anything they can to bring that about. So for me, this is the most beautiful ideal for humanity, the bodhisattva ideal, the ideal of the bodhisattva. And for me personally, it's extremely attractive to try and aspire towards this state of mind. It's a very altruistic approach to Buddhist practice. And for me, there isn't really any other approach. There is no personal liberation without liberating others. But it's extremely hard to imagine what that might be like, what that kind of state of being might be like. But fortunately, we've got help. We've got help from Shantideva, who is an 8th century Buddhist saint. And his inspiring evocation of the bodhicitta and the bodhisattva path. And during this theme, we're going to be looking at Shantideva's text, which I just read from, the Bodhicaryavatara. And we've got these beautiful booklets of an arrangement of the Bodhicaryavatara by Vedanya. And if you didn't get a copy of one last week, there's a box of them down by the door, so do take one on your way out. So we're going to be exploring this text, this guide to the bodhisattva path, how to cultivate this state of mind. And as part of that, we're also going to be, for the first part of the text, looking at a really practical list that's embedded into the first few chapters. So a list called the Viniyatas, and it's a list of mental events that we need to bring about if we want to succeed at anything. To achieve any goal, what we need to do is, first of all, really want it. We need to start by really wanting it. Then we need to really decide, make a firm decision to bring it about. And then we need to remember our decision and be able to focus on that. And we need to have wisdom, we need to think. So, we'll be looking at this list: Chanda, Adimoksha, Smriti, Samadhi, and Prajna. In the first week, Vedanya told us about Chanda. We need to cultivate desire. To achieve any goal at all, we need to really, really want it. And in the first chapter of the Bodhicaryavatara, Vedanya told us about how Shantideva really evokes how amazing the bodhicitta would be, how wonderful it would be, really cultivating that desire to bring it about. He talks about how we would be respected, how we would be free from lower states and suffering, how it would be a noble state. So in this way, Shantideva sets out how we could really, really desire, really want to develop the bodhicitta. And that's the same for anything we want to achieve. We need to start by wanting it. And then the second week, we heard that our desire needs to become a firm commitment. We need to make a firm decision to bring it about. It's not enough to want to do it. We need to really firmly decide to do it. So we heard about how the second and third chapters of the Bodhicaryavatara, Shantideva guides us through a practice called the sevenfold puja, which is how we cultivate and arrive at a decision to really bring about the bodhicitta. And the puja is a central practice within Buddhism and particularly within True Ratna. And at the end of this theme, we'll have a chance to experience puja. Then last week, Maitreyavarsin talked again about Adimoksha, the second Vinayata, exploring how our commitments can be undermined by our deeper drives if our decision isn't made with the whole of us. So we need to make that firm decision with the whole of us. And Machivarsan used our famous analogy of the horse and the rider, this split between our head and our guts. We need to get the horse on side. Our decision needs to involve the horse. Machivarsan talked about a situation where it can seem like we've made a firm decision, but then we're not able to bring it about. And we need to, Shantideva talks about mobilizing our deeper energy, particularly in terms of an aggressive warrior energy, a determination to bring it about. So that's with the ground we've covered so far, a recap of the ground we've covered so far. And it all sounds great, so far so good. We really, really want to cultivate the bodhicitta, if that's what our goal is. And we've made a really firm decision to do that. We've even cultivated some warrior energy, some determination. But what happens next? Well, very, very, very often we just forget, we get distracted. Our mind's so distracted, so disparate, so dissipated. We get easily excited by other things. We get distracted by so many other things. So our mind is pulled this way, it's pulled that way. And we keep forgetting about our decision. We keep forgetting about our goal, about our purpose. So tonight I'm going to move on to the third and fourth of the Vinayas in this list. I'm going to be looking about the importance of remembering and focusing. So the third one in the list is smrti. And it's often translated as mindfulness, but it literally means remembering, recollection or remembering. So if we want to achieve our purpose or goal, we need to remember it and keep it in mind. And then the fourth Vinaya, samadhi. Again, that literally means something like flowing together. And it's often described as a one-pointedness, and particularly used in relation to meditation, where we're focusing our mind on quite one-pointedly on the breath or on something else. But in this broader context, it means focus, just focus, focusing our being, get our being focused on our purpose, becoming concentrated on and focused on our purpose. So to achieve our purpose, the Vinayas tell us we need to really want it. We need to decide firmly to work towards it, but we also need to keep the decision in mind amongst all the hurly-burly, the busyness of everyday life, and focus our attention on it. So remembering and focus, the third and fourth of these Vinayas, are covered in the chapter on mindfulness. Shantideva has a whole chapter on mindfulness, the fifth chapter. So this evening I'll be exploring this fifth chapter on mindfulness, just to shed some light about how Shantideva says we can remember our commitment and focus on it. But to begin with, when we're exploring mindfulness, it's always helpful, I think, to clarify what we mean by mindfulness. So I'll just find the right page. Yeah, so many of you will have heard this already, but this might be new to some of you. So there's 3 different qualities or aspects of mindfulness. And there's 3 different Buddhist words that often get translated as mindfulness. So it's important to know what each of the 3 are, because they all cover different qualities, different aspects of mindfulness. So first of all, there's sati or smrti, which is one of the Vinayas, which I've said means remembering. So for me, I experience that, I don't know if you probably experience this as well, just sometimes I remember that I'm breathing, I'm doing the mindfulness of breathing. I say, oh yeah, I'm breathing. I've just been breathing all the time, but suddenly I remember that I'm breathing. So it's that kind of oh yeah moment where I just remember. And then remembering that I've got a body. Oh yeah, I've got a body. I'd kind of completely forgotten that I've got a body, and just remembering that. Remembering that there's also a whole world out there which is beautiful, and remembering to look at it. Oh yeah, there's trees and there's the sky, and just remembering to look at that. And remembering that there are other people living in the world as well as me, and that they are beautiful as well, and they've got their own agendas and their own emotions. So smrti, sati, is remembering in this way, just suddenly arriving back in the present moment, just remembering all these different aspects of our experience. And then sampajana is a type of remembering which is particularly important when we want to achieve a goal. It's remembering our purpose. It's mindfulness of purpose, remembering what we've set out to do, remembering our objective. Is what we're supposed to be doing, not getting distracted from that. This is sampajana, and it's an important aspect of mindfulness, remembering our purpose. And then the third aspect, apamada, it literally means not being intoxicated. And we can be intoxicated in lots of different ways. I was talking to a friend earlier about how we could just when we're excited, we get intoxicated, and we lose our mindfulness, we get distracted. So, and it means specifically being heedful and being vigilant, and particularly related to ethics. It's an ethical vigilance. So we're mindful and we're aware of the precepts, we're aware of what's skillful and unskillful. It's those moments where maybe we're in the gap or there's a choice, there's a kind of crossroads, and we're aware of which way that path will lead and which way this other choice will lead. So it's that vigilance, being able to make ethical choices. And it's important to say that in Buddhist tradition, the terminology gets mixed up. There's these 3 different words for mindfulness, and sometimes different Buddhist traditions use different words to relate to different aspects of mindfulness. I think that doesn't really matter so much, as long as you just keep in mind there's these 3 different aspects of mindfulness. And with Shantideva, in his chapters 4 and 5, he covers all 3 of them. And in particular, this chapter 5 is focused on sampajana and smrti. So let's have a look at the chapter. Let's explore some of the verses, some of the guidance and advice from this great Buddhist mind, Shantideva from the 8th century. Some of these verses about how to remember our goal, how to focus on it, how to practice mindfulness. And if you've got a copy of the book, or you grab one at the break, I'm going to jump about a bit. I'm not going to explore the verses in order, so you can have a listen to it and then maybe afterwards have a look through the text. I want to start by saying I absolutely love this text and I love this chapter of this text. And hopefully I can kind of share some of that with you. And one of the reasons I was saying in the team meeting earlier is this chapter for me has got some of the best metaphors, some of the best images in the whole of the Buddhist tradition are in some of these verses. So I want to share some of these images, some of these metaphors that Shantideva uses for practicing the Buddhist path. So for some of these images, I'm going to use visual aids just to bring them more alive. I've got some visual aids to help us. And some of them you'll have to use your imagination just to engage with the images and the metaphors. Okay, so this is the first one. I've got a visual aid for the first metaphor. So just bear with me. Okay. I think on the front rows you'll be quite safe, don't worry. So this is the first image or metaphor that Shantideva uses for a distracted mind, a mind that isn't mindful. He says it's like a leaky jug, and a leaky jug can't hold anything in it. Everything. Actually, you might get a little bit wet. I'll hold it low down. Okay, so you get the idea. So Shantideva says, I'll read out the verse that's in our text. If we don't keep our mindfulness, what will happen to all our other vows and precepts? Just as a sick man isn't fit for any work, so a distracted mind can't do anything useful. It's like a leaky jug. Nothing that's heard, reflected upon, or developed in meditation stays in it. So if we've got a distracted mind, if we're not mindful, it's like a leaky jug. It's just we're not going to retain anything. Anything we hear in this talk this evening, if your mind's distracted, it's gone. You're not going to retain it. So that's why taking notes actually is really important. So get a notebook and take notes, because it's likely you'll forget a lot of what I'm saying. Yeah, so that's the first analogy. A distracted mind is like a leaky jug. And that's obvious. I don't need to kind of dwell on that, explain that too much. But mindfulness is essential. Basically, mindfulness is essential unless if we don't have mindfulness, we'll become distracted. We'll forget all about our decision that we've made, this good intention, all this warrior energy we've got. It'll all go. We'll forget all about it. It's like water going through a leaky jug or a sieve. Okay, so the next image I'm going to introduce you to, I just want you to ponder while I'm exploring some of the other images. So this is a block of wood, and hopefully you can see that. And just to introduce some personality, I've put a face on the block of wood. So, because what I want you to do is observe how the block of wood behaves, because this is important. Oops. I've got a leak. I've got a leaky table. Never mind. We might get wet. So this is a block of wood, and what I want you to do is, whilst I'm just talking for the next few minutes, observe the block of wood. If you're near the front especially, just notice how the block of wood behaves, because I'm going to come back to that. So I'll put the block of wood down there. Let's call him Mr. Wood. Put Mr. Wood down there. There he is. So let's just watch how Mr. Wood behaves whilst the water's dripping along my toes. It seemed like such a good idea. Okay. So I want to go on to explore some of the other images, some of the other ideas while our block of wood, Mr. Wood, is there. while the water's dripping around me. Shantideva draws out in this chapter 3 things that I want to dwell on. So first of all is the importance of the mind, the centrality of the mind in Buddhism. The second thing is he gives us approaches to mindfulness, which I'm calling defensive mindfulness. When we're under attack by our hindrances and the kleshas, he gives us strategies, defensive strategies. And he also gives us proactive mindful strategies, things we can do to cultivate the mind of a bodhisattva. So the first one to deal with is that the mind is central in Buddhism. So in dealing with the topic of mindfulness, Shantideva emphasizes that the mind is of central importance. And he emphasizes the damage that can be done if we haven't got control of our mind, if we let our mind just run free. He says it's like an elephant that is out of control, a wild elephant that is in rut and just wreaks havoc. It causes such damage, and our mind is like that if we haven't got mindfulness, if our mind isn't under control. So it's going to harm the people around us. But mind in Buddhism is even more central than that. Our state of mind is central. It's central to everything. It's central to our own experience of the world. So depending on our state of mind, we could have been in the same situation, the same objective physical situation. And depending on our state of mind, we could either be experiencing misery or bliss. Just so our mind is central in Buddhism. It's crucial. So the next text and the next image I want to share from this chapter, Shantideva says, when we tame our mind, we tame all threats and problems, because all suffering and fear comes from the mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. We can't cover the whole world in leather, but if we put leather on the soles of our feet, it has the same effect. So Shantideva uses the analogy of walking barefoot, and he uses this analogy for our experience in general. And this is my favourite metaphor in the whole of Buddhism. This is my favourite verse, I think, even in the whole of Buddhism. And I was just reflecting earlier today. So last week I was on a camping holiday. I was camping. I'm starting to get wet now. But we'll carry on. So last week I was camping. I was on a 2-week camping holiday. And I don't know if some of you will have been camping. And what can happen in the evening, nature calls in the evening, and you have to head out to the loo. And if it's dark and you don't know where your shoes are, you have to head out barefoot. So I had experience of doing this last week. I was walking barefoot towards the bathrooms in the campsite, which weren't too far away. And then to start with, it was really soft grass. It was really nice. I was walking barefoot in the moonlight and the stars on this really soft grass. But then there was a path and it was concrete, and then it was stony, and it was ouch, my feet were really hurting. So Shantideva, he uses this analogy for our whole experiences broadly like this. Our mind, thank you, Manju. I'll use a blanket. My saviour. There we go, blanket will do fine, thank you. Oh.
You don't have to drain all your water now.
There we are. Marvellous, thank you. So we go. I'll just pause it up. So I'll just stand over. There we go. Okay, so that's good. I'd like to carry on now. Because otherwise we won't get to the end of the talk, we'll run out of time. And I've got lots of good stuff I want to say.
You come back safely, okay?
I will, I'll be very safe, thank you. So where was I? So walking barefoot. I'm walking barefoot in Cornwall on the grass, and some of it's soft and some of it's stony. And Shantideva says, well, our mind, our senses are like this barefooted Bodhinaga walking through the campsite. Sometimes our sense organs are going to come in contact all the time with different sense objects, sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, all the different senses. And some of it's going to be pleasant and some of it's going to be unpleasant. And our usual response to this experience, our experience of life, is to try and control those external situations, to only experience pleasure, to try and avoid any painful experience. And Shantideva, this is impossible. And Shantideva said it's like trying to cover the whole surface of the world in leather to protect our feet. It's just impossible. So instead of trying to control outer events, what we need to do is tame our mind. We need to control our own mind and our responses to events. Because how we respond to situations with our mind determines whether we're going to suffer or not. If we tame our mind, we tame all threats and problems. So Shantideva says, instead of trying to cover the whole world with shoe leather, just wear shoes, basically, it has the same effect. So I've got my second visual aid is my flip-flops, which I was wearing on holiday in Cornwall last week to protect my feet. So there's my flip-flops. I put them, I could wear them now, couldn't I, to keep my feet dry. Yeah. So this is my favourite Buddhist image, and my favourite metaphor in the whole of Buddhism is that we can tame our mind, and this is the same, this tames all threats, and it's the same as wearing shoes to protect our feet. Okay, so moving on. Shantideva, he talked about the centrality of mind, and then he talks about how we need to be vigilant in situations. I've called this practicing defensive mindfulness. So we heard last week about the kleshas, a teaching called the kleshas, and this is a traditional Buddhist term for the negative states of mind that seem to assail us. It seems like we get hijacked by negative states of mind. Sometimes it seems out of our control. And I want to relate this to the teaching of the wheel and the gap that we're all very familiar with, because when we're distracted, when we're kind of sleepwalking through the day, it's like we're not in control of our responses, and it can feel like we're just getting hijacked by our reactive mind. We'll find ourselves being unskillful and ethical without having set out to do that. But with mindfulness, with awareness, we can introduce the gap into this reactive cycle, and we can begin to choose to act more in line with our goal. Whatever our purpose is, we can choose to act in line with that, not to get distracted from it. But for most of us, most of the time, the awareness seems to come a bit too late. It's almost like we're already in the grip of it. We're already in the middle of those negative mental states. So what do we do in that situation? So it might be we're aspiring to have the heart of a Bodhisattva that cares for all beings more than they care for themselves. But we might find ourselves in the grip of selfish negative states, the kleshas like jealousy, craving, anger, pride, etc. So this is where Mr. Wood comes in. This is where analogy of the block of wood comes in. So Shantideva says we need to behave in this situation like a block of wood. So hopefully the people at the front have been watching closely how our block of wood has been behaving over the last 5 minutes. So when the mind, I'll read Shantideva's verses. Shantideva says, when the mind experiences attraction or aversion, we should neither act nor speak, but remain like a block of wood. When the mind is inflated or critical, full of arrogance, intoxicated, evasive, dishonest, when it looks down on or blames others, we should remain like a block of wood. The reactive mind is greedy for possessions, respect, fame and status, or just wants the attention of an audience. It longs to hold forth. It cares nothing for the good of others. It is always seeking its own advantage and longing for an opportunity to preach its opinions. It is intolerant, idle, cowardly, disrespectful, foul-mouthed, and biased in its own favour. So we should remain like a block of wood. So it doesn't hold back, Shantideva. You'll find this in a lot of the Bodhicaryavatara. He's very, very direct, very, very honest, quite brutally honest about what our reactive mind can be like, in a way to inspire us, to motivate us to do something about it. And so Shantideva says, in that situation where we're gripped by negative states, we should behave like our block of wood here. So hopefully, what if someone could, some people have been watching closely, what has our block of wood been doing for the last few minutes? Absolutely nothing. So it's been doing absolutely nothing. So when we find ourselves in the grip of one of these negative mental states, we need to do absolutely nothing. We need to not speak or act, just contain what's happening, not harm other people with it. We need to protect other people from the potential harm of speaking or acting from our negative states. We need to just be like a block of wood and not speak and not act. If we've got the awareness, a self-awareness to realise this is what's happening, just restrain ourselves. Don't speak and don't act until we've either dealt with it or it's passed or it's subsided. And there's a little point I wanted to make about what some people say, or might have the question, well, is this not being authentic? I want to be authentic and express how I'm really feeling. Well, my response is, well, good. If you're angry or jealous, I don't want you to be authentic. I want you to contain that and not express it to me. I want you to limit the harm of that and just contain it. In a way, this is a situation not to be authentic, just to be like our block of wood and not cause harm with our inner world, our mental states. Okay, so that's the next really great image from this chapter, being like our block of wood here. Okay, so we also can be start to be proactive. Shantideva says we can protect our mind from the kleshas before they arise, before those states arise through the practice of mindfulness. And he uses another analogy. He says that the kleshas are like thieves, trying to steal our positive states from us. So this is the verse Shantideva uses. He says, "Many people know the Dharma, have faith and try hard, but come unstuck because of lack of mindfulness. That band of thieves, the kleshas, searches for a way through our defences. When they have found one, they rob us of the opportunity for a good life. So always keep the guard of mindfulness at the door of your mind." So there's actually two amazing metaphors, and the second one is having a guard, posting a guard at the door of your mind. And this brings in appamada, this sense of vigilance, being vigilant, having, taking guard, being careful, being vigilant in situations. And this is quite alive for me at the moment. On where I live in Nether Edge in our street, there's been quite a few burglaries. There's been a spate of burglaries in the past few weeks, actually. So I heard about this a few weeks ago. Some houses at the top of the road, the cars were stolen. And when I came back from holiday, my car had been broken into. So it's a real heightened sense, when you know there's kind of the threat of burglary, there's a heightened sense of vigilance. Now I never bother whether the door was locked or not before, and I wouldn't bother about leaving things out on display, but now I'm much more vigilant. I'll put everything away. I won't leave things out in my car, making sure the doors and the windows are shut. So Shantideva thinks about our mind and our mental states in this same way. If we have the sense of, like, if we let our guard down, if we get distracted, those negative states will just kind of steal all the progress we've made. This is an analogy that he uses. So we need to keep our mind vigilant, keep the guard of mindfulness at the door of our mind. Pay attention and protect those positive, skillful states that we've developed. And then we need to be extra vigilant in situations when we know we're vulnerable, when we know we might react, those situations when we might react negatively. We need to be extra careful, extra vigilant in those situations. And the next metaphor Shantideva uses, he says we need to be like a wounded man, a man protecting a wound in a crowd full of people. He's really taking care not to get, being aware of that wound, that vulnerability, and protecting it. So this means with mindfulness, we really need to be honest with ourselves and really know ourselves. Be honest with yourself. What are your weaknesses? What are those situations when you're vulnerable to being unskillful, to reacting, and to being caught off guard and taken over by the kleshas? So this verse isn't saying, I've not read the verse yet. So the verse is, just as a wounded man in the middle of a rough crowd guards his wound with great care, we need to guard our mind in bad company. The determined practitioner who keeps this attitude can never be broken, even in the worst company. So I wanted to say, this isn't making, I think, a judgment about other people being good or bad. It's more about us knowing ourselves. In what situations are you likely to be unskillful? And be vigilant in those situations. So if your goal, so say my goal is to be kinder to my family, I need to be extra vigilant in the mornings when I'm trying to get my children ready for school, because that's when I get stressed and that's when I get irritable. So I need to know in that situation, I've got a weakness, I've got a vulnerability, and I need to be extra careful, extra vigilant in that situation. There might be a situation at your work where you're vulnerable to negative states, particular colleagues perhaps. Or maybe if your goal is to drink less alcohol, well, you need to be extra vigilant in certain social situations when you're more likely to drink alcohol. For me, on holiday last week, putting up the tent is a situation where I need to be really vigilant, because I get really, really stressed, and then I get irritable, and then I blame my wife for it going wrong. It's not her fault, it's my fault, but I do this every year. And so we joked about it, and she gets stressed about other things, and we joked about it beforehand, said, well, you're going to get stressed about this, I'm likely to get stressed about putting the tent up. And you just know, going into that situation with some awareness, some mindfulness, you're going to handle it better, you're just extra vigilant. You're like someone, you've got an injury, you're vulnerable in that situation, you need to take extra care. Okay. So that's what I'm calling defensive mindfulness, these mindful strategies that Shantideva is giving us. But it's not just, mindfulness doesn't involve just stopping and thwarting those negative states, the unskillful states, the kleshas. If we're really serious about developing this kind of Bodhisattva mind, the heart and mind of wisdom and compassion, that cares for others more than they care for themselves, we need to be proactive in cultivating that kind of mind, cultivating the heart and the mind of a Bodhisattva. So we can use this the other way around. We can be proactive about the situations we put ourselves in. We can choose to put ourselves in situations where we will be mindful, where we will remember our purpose and our goal, where we won't get distracted, where we will thrive. So one example might be spend as much time as you can in Sangha situations, because you're probably more likely to remember the Dharma and remember your Buddhist practice in those situations. You're less likely to be distracted, I would say. So Shantideva says, mindfulness comes easy to those who are lucky enough to live with their teacher and practice under their guidance, if they have great respect for his good opinion. So he's going even further. He's saying, well, if you can, live with your Buddhist teachers, because you're going to constantly be receiving that kind of that guidance, that teaching. And there are people who do choose to live with each other, live with their Buddhist friends. That is, something that is, seems to work very well for people. So that's proactive mindfulness. We can know ourselves and know the situations where we'll thrive. Choose to put ourselves in those situations. And then Shantideva revisits the Viniyatas Chanda and Adimoksha. Let's see if I can find them. So Shantideva goes back to just really wanting mindfulness, wanting our purpose. And he then talks about remembering our goal, remembering our purpose, this mindfulness of our purpose. So he says, those who are not so lucky to live with their teachers should remember that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas see everything that happens everywhere. Everything is laid out in front of them, and before them we stand. Meditating on this, we should keep mindfulness of the presence of the Buddhas at all times, maintaining a sense of shame, respect, and awe. We should also read and recite the scriptures over and over again. Constantly reminding ourselves of the teachings helps us to guard the mind and to remember to put the teachings into practice. So with these verses encouraging us to spend time with the Sangha, reflect on the mindfulness of the presence of the Buddha, read the Dharma over and over again. This is the three jewels. It's mindfulness of the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha. And when we're chanting the salutation to the three jewels, when we're chanting the refuges and precepts, or the Tiratna Vandana, this is what we're doing. We're cultivating mindfulness of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And Shantideva says we should be doing this as much as possible all the time. So this is another aspect of proactive mindfulness. We can choose what we focus our mind on and focus it on the Dharma and on the Buddha and on the Sangha. And then further than that, Shantideva says, well, we need to remember friendliness and kindness, which again I had an experience a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, where I've been quite under pressure. I felt like I've been under pressure and I got a little bit stressed. And then I went on retreat and I came back from retreat and it was another one of those, oh yeah, moments. Oh yeah, kindness is really important, isn't it? I kind of forgotten about kindness. I felt, oh yeah, I've remembered kindness. It's great, isn't it? And I felt a bit silly, but at the same time relieved that I'd remembered the importance of kindness. So this is another aspect of mindfulness, just remembering to be kind to people, remembering other people. So Shantideva says in his text, having mastered our lower nature in this way, in talking about mastering, taming the mind, we should give up frowning and always have a smiling face, being the first to greet and talk to others, a friend to the universe. We should speak kindly and look straight at people's faces, as if drinking them in with our eyes. That's beautiful. That's a beautiful verse. Our mind should serve our will and other beings, unshakable as a great mountain, knowing the world to be like a magical display, full of serene confidence, calm, eager to help others. So, Shantideva evokes how we can be mindful of the importance of kindness, mindful of other people, the importance of friendliness. Remembering that, there's a world out there and it's full of other people and we need to take them into account. So Sangharakshita, when he talks about mindfulness in a very seminal lecture, he talks about there being 4 dimensions to awareness. And he says, it is really important, it's crucial to develop a self-awareness, awareness of our inner world, our body and its movements, our mental states. But it's even more important, just as important, to develop an awareness of the world around us, become mindful and attentive and curious about the world around us, and also the people in it become mindful and aware of other people. Beware of the impact of our actions, our behaviour on other people. So a crucial aspect of mindfulness, particularly if we're serious about the Bodhisattva ideal, our mindfulness needs to extend to mindfulness of other people and remembering kindness, remembering friendliness. So a Bodhisattva aspires to care for others more than they care for themselves. So we need to train ourselves in this aspect of mindfulness, having kindly eyes, noticing, yes, be mindful about how you perceive other people. What stories do you have about them? What labels do you place on them? Just be mindful of your perception of other people. Try and see them with kindly eyes. And train ourselves in kindly speech. Notice what we say and the effect it has on people. Okay, so I want to spend, before I close, a few minutes talking about mindfulness of breathing practice, which is obviously the crucial meditation practice to cultivate mindfulness in our daily lives. And after the break, I'm going to be leading a session of the mindfulness of breathing where I'll be giving some input around how we can practice the mindfulness of breathing to cultivate some of these aspects of mindfulness. So how do we use the mindfulness of breathing to make flip-flops or sandals for our mind, to protect our mind, cushioning the effects of our reactions, taming our wild elephant mind? How do we do that with the mindfulness of breathing? So I want to begin with the start of the practice, the start of the meditation. And we need to again go back to the Vinayas. Whatever we want to do, so that includes becoming mindful. If we want to become mindful, we need to really, really want it. We need to have chanda, and we need to make a firm decision. So we need to start the practice by connecting with the value of mindfulness. What are the benefits of mindfulness? Why would you want to become more mindful? What effect would it have on you? Cultivate the pleasure that can come from the mindfulness of breathing, from being absorbed, the pleasurable states of mind that we can experience. And then we're much more likely to want to do it, and there'll be less resistance, actually. Our mind, the horse, will say, yeah, I want pleasure. Yeah, I want that. I want some of those benefits. So if we can develop and connect with chanda at the start of the practice, that's crucial. And then make a firm decision, a firm commitment about how you're going to use and apply yourself, how you're going to use your mind for the next 30, 25, 40 minutes, however long it is. So for me, doubt and indecision can be a main hindrance that I experience in meditation. And I think this often creeps in the mindfulness of breathing, where I've kind of made a half-hearted commitment to follow the breath. But I'm also, because I can follow the breath with part of my mind fairly straightforwardly, I'll also try and do other things at the same time. So part of me will be following the breath, but another part of me will kind of, just thinking about the talk I'm going to give, or a meeting I'm going to have, or something that happens. So I'm not really fully committed to the practice. And this is because I'm not fully committed most of the time. I'm trying to do lots of different things at the same time, and I'm not fully committed to the task that I'm doing. So when I bring my mind to meditate, that's the habit, that's the mind I've cultivated. So that's the mind I'm going to be presented with on the cushion, is a kind of half-committed mind. So we need to connect with chanda and firmly commit to the practice. And if you notice yourself trying to do 2 or 3 other things, go back to the commitment, recommit to the practice. And the commitment you're making is to keep bringing your mind back again and again to the breath. Just keeping it back, training your mind not to be distracted, not to be a leaky jug, just to be able to be focused and with what's happening. So you're training your mind over and over again to do that. And you can use the body, keep bringing your attention back to the breath in the body. For me, this is crucial. If I'm with the breath, with the body, the breath in the body, my mind is much less likely to drift away. And gradually, if you keep doing this over time, your mind is being trained to pay attention and rest on one thing, to be one-pointed and less like a leaky jug. Okay, so the next thing to talk about in the mindfulness of breathing is what we're trying to do is become mindful. It might sound obvious, but we're trying to become aware of your experience. What is your mind? Bring awareness to your mind. What is your mind doing right now? So when you've connected with chanda, you've decided to do the practice, and then bring awareness to your mind. What is your mind doing right now? See what kind of mind you have today, because it's going to be different every time you sit down. What kind of mind have you got today? And then decide what to do next. Set an appropriate goal for that meditation, or an appropriate next step. So if your mind like a wild elephant, you might sit down and your mind's like a wild elephant in rut, just creating havoc all over the place. Well, then it might be unrealistic to aim for first or second dhyana. what you might want to do is just say, okay, well, let's just, in this meditation practice, let's just bring this elephant a bit more under control. Let's end the practice just with a bit less of a wild elephant. And that will have been an appropriate way to work with your mind in that meditation. So just aim to get to 2 or to get to 3 or 4 might be a really successful meditation with that kind of, if you're starting off with an elephant mind. Maybe, the water in your jug isn't clear. This is another metaphor for the mind, is the mind can be clear and like clear water, but it could be contaminated with one of the hindrances. So if your mind is contaminated by one of the hindrances, well, what is it? What is going on in your mind? And how are you going to work with it? What is the thing you're going to do? So bring awareness to your mind as you sit down to meditate and work appropriately, creatively. So if it's restlessness and anxiety, which has been in the past a lot for me, well then if you notice your mind is restless and anxious and the mind's clouded with that, well then calm the mind down. It sounds like an obvious thing to say, but that's what you need to be doing in the mindfulness of breathing, is using the breath and the body to calm down. You bring your attention low in the body, use the body and the breath to calm down. Okay. So, and if we can work with the mindfulness of breathing in this way, and we'll be doing this after the break, well, over time, you're going to be making a mind that's more fit for purpose. It's going to be able to contain and remember, recall what it hears, what it's decided to do. It's not going to be like a leaky jug. And you're going to be able to be more like our block of wood here, less reactive in those difficult, crucial situations. You can be able to practice restraint and control and not speak or act out of hatred or anger or jealousy. And in those situations, you can be extra vigilant. You can bring awareness, more and more awareness to those situations when you're vulnerable, and you need to be extra vigilant. And I think the last thing I would say is that I was saying this to my Mitra group last night. I've noticed that after, I don't know how many years of practice now, my mind is actually quite a lot more flexible and malleable. So if I do notice that there's a negative state going on, I can quite quickly now bring it, much more quickly than I would have done in the past, back to my purpose, and this is the fruit of years and years and years of mindfulness of breathing practice, just again and again bringing my mind back to the breath. Well, in the situations when I'm off the cushion, I can now bring my mind back to what I want to be doing much, much more quickly, much more flexibility. So I just want to end with 2 more verses from Shantideva. Shantideva talks about it's not just on the cushion. We need to be practicing mindfulness all the time, moment by moment. So Shantideva says, whatever situation we are in, we should make it part of our training. Every activity is a spiritual practice for the person who acts like this. So it's not just on the cushion. We need to practice moment by moment mindfulness, just becoming aware, if you can, all the time. What is your mind doing? And again, if you're doing this in the mindfulness of breathing on the cushion, this will train your mind to do this more and more. Notice what's in your mind, what's happening. Is your mind at the moment a selfish mind, or is it a caring mind? Is it an inward-looking mind, or is it a mind that's reaching out, looking out to other people? And over time, we can cultivate this mind of the Bodhisattva gradually, bit by bit, maybe lifetime after lifetime. We can cultivate a mind that's got kindly eyes and speaks with a kindly voice, and a mind that's altruistic in its direction, a mind that is intent on awakening the bodhicitta, not just for itself, but for all beings. That bodhi heart, that rare jewel of the mind that cares more for others than they care for themselves. So Shantideva ends by saying, in brief, mindfulness means observing the body and the mind at every moment. We need to actually put this into practice and not just talk about it. When we're sick, what use is it just to read a medical textbook? Thank you.